Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Sanjay and I'll be your host for the webinar today. Our webinar today focuses on challenges in mobility testing and insights into crash discovery. Our webinars are designed to gain insight into the field of mobility, which is in fact becoming an essential part of our daily life. Endeavour Software Technologies, a mobility-focused organization with more than 300 experts having 11 plus years of expertise, are the leaders in providing mobility solutions to several Fortune 100 companies across the globe and enabling them to leverage mobility for their organization. In today's webinar, we'll have 45 to 50-minute session followed by 15-minute question and answer round. Please feel free to raise any questions in between the presentation by typing them in questions window in your GoToWebinar console. The webinar is being recorded for your convenience, and the recordings will be made available on techendeavour.com/webinars. One of the key highlights today is post this webinar, Endeavour is offering a complimentary deep dive workshop for 3 to 4 hours where our testing team will interact, review, and analyze your mobile solutions testing strategy and provide you insights and recommendations for a robust and crash-resistant mobile application. Now, let me kickstart the presentation by introducing our panelists. Today we have Tom Parrish, Mobile Strategy Thought Leader, and Saurabh Panda, Head of Endeavour Testing Practice. Now, I would like to invite Tom to take us through the webinar today. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Sanjay, for a very, very warm introduction, and welcome everyone on the webinar, whether you're listening to it live or you're listening to it after the fact. I appreciate your time. I know your time is valuable, and we have a lot of very interesting information about crash discovery. Our agenda. The first item we're going to go over is the mobile industry overview, so you have a context for why mobility is being such a huge driver in the change in IT industry. And then mobile testing overview. I'm going to talk about some challenges in app testing. And with number 3, what is crash discovery testing? There I will be talking about sort of the how and why of encountering crashes in mobile devices. Top 10 test scenarios are the typical reasons why crashes occur. And we're going to have 4 use cases, industry case studies. We're going to sprinkle them through this webinar so they're not all piled in the end down there. It gives you a sense of what's going on each step of the way. And finally, at the end, Saurabh is going to give much more detail about Endeavour's approach from the experience they've had in developing applications and developing a platform for crash discovery testing. So let's get started. Why are enterprises adopting mobility? There's a very concise way of saying it. The ability of an enterprise to connect to people and control assets from any location. That's the fundamental reason. There's huge cost savings in this and productivity gains to be done. But let's take a step back. Do you know that today Apple has shipped over 250 million iPhones worldwide? That's a lot of devices. And that's just the iPhone. You're familiar with Android. You know that Windows is coming on strong. But let's take a look ahead a little bit here. According to Gartner, mobility will be a $1 trillion business by 2014. That's just next year. Analysts further predict that the smartphones and tablets in the enterprise will exceed the $1 billion mark, the 1 billion mark in 2012. And then the enterprise mobility market in general is going to reach $181 billion in this case by 2017. So what's been driving this? Let's move to the market drivers. All right, we're going to focus on this graphic on the right-hand side first. We're going to talk about, or at least I want to talk about, the nexus of forces in the convergence and mutual reinforcement of social mobility, cloud, and information patterns that drive new business scenarios. Now, this nexus of forces could be described like this. Information is the context for delivering enhanced social and mobile experiences, and we're collecting so much more information now with mobile devices. Mobile devices have become a platform for social networking in new ways, as you well know. And social networking is both personal as well as business. And in some cases, they cross between those two barriers. But the bottom line is there's a tremendous amount of information that's being accessed across a wide range of IT resources and servers, as well as being generated and captured and evaluated. This is part of what's driving the consumer market business online from mobile devices. Social links people to the work and each other, in new ways and unexpected ways. I think people are discovering every month an entirely new way for the mobile social connection to bring about a new way of working and a new way of selling devices. And then finally, the cloud for service-oriented architecture. Of those who have an understanding in that background, clouds are enabling delivery of information and functionality to users and systems. So, the consumerization of IT, that's what I want to move to next. According to Gartner, the consumerization of IT will be the most significant trend affecting IT for the next 10 years. And it makes sense if you consider that as individuals now we're carrying around these devices. And it includes mobile device management, application management, data protection, and IT security, and really a lot more. And the consumerization of IT offers the potential for the enterprise to go for what it's going for, the potential to increase employee productivity and reduce overall IT costs. However, there's a challenge, and that challenge is that there are new security risks and financial exposure and operational complexity with this proliferation of mobile devices in the enterprise. To minimize the operational cost of BYOD, it's a new term, bring your own device, enterprises need solutions for broad platform support to consolidate the management and integrate with their existing endpoint security infrastructure. Mobile device management and mobile application management and mobile security and data security are going to help ensure visibility and control of BYOD, or bring your own device, and IT connectivity. So before I mention mobile endpoint uncertainty, let me just bring your attention forward on the notion of if we're going to an uncertain, what's the certain? And for those of us who've been around in the 90s in IT and then all through the 2000s, if you think about it for a moment, we had a very certain IT environment. I know I did. I did desktop support for Motorola for years, and we had one PC and one operating system and one network and one email system, and everything stayed on the desk. It didn't move around. Now we have multiple devices, multiple operating systems. These devices are being moved all over the world, some of them even being lost. That's this big security issue there. So there's a lot of uncertainty from an IT perspective, and they have to find a way to get their arms around that in order to really gain the productivity increases that they want to go for. So the rapid introduction of the mobile devices is creating this mobile uncertainty. IT organizations just don't know what type of device or operating system is going to be there next year, especially with people bringing their own devices. So that uncertainty is putting a lot of pressure on there. Endpoint independence is what they're going for, and refers to the network, the security, and the application architecture that enables an enterprise to protect sensitive information regardless of the type of mobile device or who owns that device. That's the new world for IT. Okay, let's move on now. Why test-driven development? Why test-driven development? Well, applications are flooding into the market, and studies show that there are more than 2 billion applications just for the Apple and the Android market alone. A test-driven environment, or test-driven development, completely turns traditional development around. Now, for those not in the testing world, you would sort of think that testing happens at the end of product design, at the end of software development, more than likely. And we're talking about a completely different approach here. Test-driven development is where the testing is integrated into the design process and the application development process, and there is still testing done at the end, but this is done all through. When you first go to implement a new feature, for instance, the first question you want to ask is whether the existing design is the best design. that enables you to implement that functionality from a testing perspective. A significant advantage of TDD, as we'll refer to it as test-driven development, is that it enables you to take a small step when writing software for mobile apps and have some certainty about the ability for that app and that feature to work. TDD does not replace traditional testing. Instead, it just defines a proven way to ensure effective unit testing. Okay, so mobile testing overview. There we go. You know, users want mobile apps to be simple and fast. I know that's what you want. It's certainly what I want. Just one nagging bug or a frequent crash or a crash upon app launch can spoil the entire user experience. And I know you've been there, I sure have. But surprisingly, there's no previous existing comprehensive guide, on how to test the particular complexities of mobile devices. We're in new territories here. So we're going to go through each one of these. There'll be a little hot spot. And the first one will be environment with regards to challenges in app testing. So let's talk about the challenges in app testing and what are the challenges of the environment. The environment in this case is target devices. When you're designing an app, what's the target device? That has to be the first thing on the checklist that needs to be discussed and needs to be considered in quality assurance. Next is devices have different versions of operating systems, right? We have the Android operating system and all the variations of that, and we have iOS for Apple, and it has its iterations of those. They get updated frequently, and the quality assurance team should ensure that our applications work smoothly after the OS updates. When approaching an application from the testing perspective, it's very important to understand the domain for which it is being developed. User controls that are used for applications in a gaming domain, for instance, can't be reused for another type of application. In other words, if you have a financial analysis or maybe it's something like Evernote where you're doing sort of databasing your ideas and knowledge, you don't need gaming controls for that. It's a totally different domain. It's a totally different way in which a user brings themselves to their app because they have a different set of expectations. So let's move to application now. Our next hot spot. Thank you very much. Application challenges. Well, another major roadblock we face while developing these applications is their behavior patterns on different devices. All right? We especially need to keep a keen eye on the way native application behaves on multiple devices with different versions of the operating system. One major hurdle we face most of the time is the constant comparison made between a mobile application and its existing web or desktop application counterpart. There are just going to be some differences. And this can be a major point that the end user would like to check out as soon as possible, as soon as the application is made live. And when he does, you don't want him discovering any crashes. So let's move now to the next hot spot, which will be users, considering the users with regards to challenges in the app testing. We want to make it simple and easy for navigation means in an application. For instance, you don't want long forms which force the user to scroll down to the bottom. I don't know, if you're like me, I don't even like long forms on a desktop computer when there's 5 and 10 and 15 different little beady boxes that have to be filled out. On a mobile device, oh, it's just so frustrating. So you need to give that some thought. The user, what causes a sense of frustration? That's not like a crash, but that certainly makes a big difference in the user experience. So when it comes to the mobile application, diligent decisions should be taken to choose the right functionality to be accommodated, bearing in mind memory, input, network constraints, and all the other aspects that come into to design from a hardware perspective. All right, let's now move to the device itself. What are the challenges in app testing that come from the app itself? Well, a major roadblock that we have in terms of the device perspective is touch and non-touch device outputs. They, the The BlackBerry has keys on it, physical keys, not the new ones, but some of the models do, and lots of the older ones do, and there are other phones that have that. And of course the iPhone has its touch device, and Android has its touch device, but of course the touch actually works slightly bit differently. There's also browser limitations, and browser limitations, I don't know how much you've spent time with your Safari browser, for instance, or your Chrome browser on the Android phone, but they don't work quite the same way. You can't always do all the things that you want to do in a mobile browser as you want to do in a desktop browser. That has to be given consideration in testing. As we mentioned before, especially if you have an app that runs on both a mobile device as well as a desktop device. How about battery drainage? Battery drainage is pretty important because we all want the battery to last for a week. If we're lucky, we get it for a day, maybe less than a day. But it's an important consideration for mobile device, and in particular in case of the GPS in applications. The GPS is going to burn up more power the more accurate or exact the location needs to be. And so some apps don't need pinpoint accuracy, so you don't need to be using the GPS all the time. You want to make sure that you got just the amount of accuracy you need for what you want to do in the application, so the battery won't need to work so rigorously. That's both a design issue, of course, as well as a testing issue, but you'll figure it out in testing pretty quickly, and that's something they'll feed back to the design team. All right, let's go to network now. What are the challenges of the network in app testing? Well, probably the biggest one is poor networks, or no network, or intermittent loss of network. The application needs to be tested under different network conditions, and we must also ensure that the application does not crash or hang because of the varying signal conditions. Now, I would imagine each one of you listening, if you've got your phone there in your hand, and you can imagine and remember when you've been moving in a car from one tower to the next and connection drops out. Or the one that I always seem to find happen is I go between buildings or in an elevator or a lift, and then suddenly the network connection drops out. You forget about that because you just assume you're connected all the time. How's the app going to work with that? And was that tested? It's okay if it stops running for a little bit, but you don't want it to just sit there and spin and never come back. We need to ensure that the application responds in an agreed upon manner. That's the bottom line here to these kinds of interruptions, network interruptions. And some of the most common kinds of interruptions that occur with loss of network, for instance, would be incoming calls. What happens when the network becomes intermittent in some way? Low battery alerts. I've had a phone that I remember when the battery got low and a little screen came up and said low battery, then the whole phone just quit working. It was very strange. Alarm clocks, there's another one. You would think, it's just an alarm clock. It's just telling you what time it is, but you don't want that to be interfering with what's going on. All right, finally, app testing automation. Let's go to automation. If you have an engineering background like I do, one of the things you might consider from an engineering management point of view is, why can't you just have a software program that does all the testing for you? Well, really the challenges are greater than that. There are application suites for testing, but they're not as comprehensive as you might think. Most of the available tools are very device specific. As a matter of fact, it's difficult to find a single tool that can help us across all the test scenarios and across all the platforms. One case in particular is image management, zooming in and out, and of course that's use of the image, but the way you save it, the way you share it, the way you bring it back up, the way you select images, where you want to put them in your device and how long you want to hold them. There's a tremendous number of variables that come into play there, and very, very often you have a failure when trying to work with automation tools to test out all the image management situations. And finally, the bottom line is a lot of successful applications have multiple platforms, right? So you have to have testing for multiple OS which require multiple automation tools, and that's expensive. You have to take a look at, does it really pay off to try to do that versus trying another way that's more more proven through experience. So now let's go to a use case. Let's move on to the next case, next scenario here. We've done enough talking about various details in app crashing. Let's take an leading insurance company as a use case, and I think we're going to try to zoom in on the app there, picture of the app on the right-hand side. Yeah, so you can see it says virtual agent briefcase. Basically, the scenario here is that imagine yourself as an insurance agent. You no longer have an office. What you have is Starbucks. You go to someone's home. You visit them in different various locations. And your job is to inform and sell and complete a sale, or a quote anyway, on an insurance product of some kind. This particular scenario means that we've moved from a very predictable, environment for doing quoting to potentially unpredictable due to network fluctuations. You have no idea what's going to happen when you're taking your device. You don't want to be in the middle of doing a quote and have the app just fail on you due to poor networking and have to reboot. It's very embarrassing. Even before you get started as a salesperson, you want to synchronize your calendar for the day and get rolling. You wouldn't want that application to somehow or another just freeze up on you and then not know what to do. You can't get to the app, can't get to the quotes. That would be a real problem. Sometimes, if you're doing app testing, this comes up pretty often. You find out that changing the orientation of the device actually causes a crash. This is just due to the hardware-software interactions with the application. And in this insurance app, since you have to see a large piece of paper at one time, essentially, and a lot of variables that have to be entered into a form, you're going to be changing the orientation quite often. And finally, the agent wouldn't want to be launching the app only to find out that that there was an upgrade on the OS, and the OS now doesn't work with the app. So that's a real problem. All right, let's move on to what is a crash. Now, what is a crash? Right. So, I think everybody knows what a crash is. You use your device and it just doesn't work anymore. But specifically, an app crash is a condition where the mobile application ceases to function. That's sort of the bottom line. And, like today's mobile apps have their share of performance problems, and they need some fine-tuning. Recent research shows that 47% of mobile apps have had a problem in the past year when accessing an app on the mobile phone. 47% of mobile users have had a problem in the past year when accessing an app. Of course, a lot of apps have had a problem themselves, right? The basic problem that comes up is slowness and unresponsiveness being the biggest complaint. Now, I would have to say, of all the apps I've used that have had problems just as a user, that certainly falls into that category right there. Facebook, for instance, did you know on the Facebook iPhone app, there are over 38,000 reviews. More than 21,000 customers have given the application only a single star. That's not good. Users repeatedly describe the app as slow and unresponsive. Always trying to load, always trying to load, always trying to load. I've seen that. Let's go through some of the statistics of iOS and Android. Yes, right. So this particular graphic that's up right here shows you all the different Android OS versions. As you can see, there are quite a few, and depending on the version, there's a number of crashes on one versus the other. You don't have to know about the details, but the point here is that you can see the complexity involved. Same with Apple iOS, and we'll slip on over to the other side there and zoom in on that. Apple iOS have had equal ones, and then this crashes per app launch. Apple versus Android continuing to go up as time goes on. And of course, there are more and more apps as time goes on, so that influences it to some degree. But that gives you an idea of crashes aren't going away. They're just becoming more complex to figure out. There are more of them to deal with. So, well, then that sort of leads us to the question of why apps crash. And we'll tackle that in the next slide here. Well, apps crash for a number of reasons, really. Now, what you see up on the screen there are the technical reasons that occur from an engineering point of view. You don't really care. They just, when it crashes, right? But we're trying to explain some detail here, and that's one of them that you need to be aware of is that incompatibility between the app and the iOS and the OS is one of the big ones because in the Apple iOS, it just doesn't get updated automatically. I'll give you a case in point. I picked up my wife's phone the other day, and I rarely see it. I have no need to see her phone, right? I picked it up and looked at it, and there must have been 30 or 40 apps that had not been updated, and the OS had not been updated, iOS, and she was complaining about the phone not working well. It had been well over a year since she had even updated it and was doing a lot of complaining about the apps not working right. So, those incompatibilities in the apps that were there were no longer working very well, and it was causing a lot of problems for her. So hardware incompatibility can be another item between hybrid and mobile web apps when integrated to work with native apps like GPS, camera, contacts, and calendar. A native app is the app that's actually on the phone. A hybrid app or a web app would be one that actually runs over the network. But the GPS and the camera and all those type of things are actually on the mobile device itself. And if it's trying to access something on the web while you have a network disconnect, then you've got a problem. The third-party APIs or application program interfaces, or sometimes referred to as just web services, are scattered throughout many data centers. Really, one app might be accessing 5 or 10 or 15 different APIs from many different locations, and if any one of those APIs change, then the app is no longer going to support that change, and the device is simply going to fail. And in particular, when you have changes in the operating system that get updated, those APIs are very likely to be affected, and that's an area that has to be considered in testing. And what are you going to do when that occurs from a testing environment and from a design environment, because it's an inevitable issue that's going to come up. iOS particularly, users very rarely update their apps, as I was saying about my wife. This is just one problem that has to be dealt with that we know is going to be coming up. And the nice thing about the Android phone, of course, is users have their apps auto-updated, which will eliminate some of these problems. All right, then what exactly is the impact of app crashes? And we'll cover that in the next slide. Well, what would be the first word that comes to your mind? I would say frustration, right? Especially if you paid for that app. How many of you have actually bought an app for $3.99 or $4.99 and it didn't work? In fact, you've already bought the app, so what are you going to do? Well, let's talk about the crash and the impacts. With so much competition in the new space, if users don't have an excellent experience with their app, top-notch, works right out of the gate kind of thing, then they're going to switch, right? Now, in an enterprise world, you don't have that choice. You may be required to use the app, even if it is buggy, but the enterprise loses because you're no longer competitive. You're no longer, as productive as you hope to be, which, ultimately affects their competitiveness. But from a user-consumer perspective, you're just going to go look for another app. You want to switch to something that's going to be faster, and that there's an update available to it, and it's a newer app, and it's got more stars on it. Typically, is what we look for. So the user experience will be mirrored by the rating of the app in the App Store, and negative ratings can be the source of significant sales losses. Mobile apps live and die by their ratings in the App Store. When the ratings suffer, consumer adoption suffers. That's the bottom line. This may be the reason why, interesting statistic here that you may not know, 80% of branded iPhone, Android, and BlackBerry applications fail to achieve 1,000 downloads. That's not very many. Poor mobile application performance directly impacts consumer acquisition and retention. So, enough about those kinds of crashes. Let's take a real-world example of a banking use case and talk about the kind of scenarios that come up in that. And this is one I would imagine many of you listeners have had some experience with. Personally, I use Frost Bank, so I'm familiar with their banking system. And the banking app is one where an app crash that's going to lead to poor user experience is just critical from a transaction point of view. It just has to work right. But here's a couple of interesting problems that come up from a testing perspective, and thinking about the user and the environment. And, what happens if you're depositing a check and the user might deposit an invalid check? All right, what do you do in that particular case? That could be a problem there. What happens, here's one that I hadn't even considered. As a matter of fact, the Endeavour folks brought this to my attention, as they would. I'm in Austin, they're in India. They said, what if you're in the United States, Central Time Zone, and you travel to India, and you've scheduled a payment or a transfer from a personal account using the bank app from, where your mobile user are typically. It has the device set up for a particular time zone, and you've set it for your local time zone. Now you've moved to India and the device is automatically updated. What happens? Does the app work properly? Does the transaction occur? What if that was your mortgage payment? That could be a real problem. How do you test that out? Well, I guess somebody gets to get on a plane and check it out. Probably not. That'd be a little expensive, but you get the point here, is that you have to consider time zone situations around the world when you're doing transactions in banking apps. Try to schedule a payment. How about if you try to schedule a payment or a transfer where users don't have an eligible payee? You just like, oh yes, I need to pay this person, but I haven't done it yet, and you've scheduled it, you've put the name in there, and what happens? It doesn't work, it crashes. Or schedule a payment or a transfer while transaction is in progress and the network goes off. You're running from one meeting to the next, you go between buildings, you go into a lift or an elevator, and you're right in the middle of that transfer because you're right in the middle of moving to one meeting to the next, and the network goes off. How are you going to handle that? That'd be really important to test. I could see that coming up often. Okay, then what about top 10 app crash scenarios? What are the typical type reasons why apps crash? We've certainly talked about a number of them. So you can see the top crashes. Let's just talk about the top crashes that we face during all kinds of mobile apps. All kinds during testing of all kinds of mobile apps, not just iOS, not just Android. The primary reason for crashes are smartphone users are no exception to a particular rule. Faster is better. They expect their apps to be blazingly fast, quick. Why is that important? Well, the thing is, if I don't know how often you've updated your phone. If you love mobile phones, maybe you do it every couple of years. So your phone now works much faster, significantly faster. Maybe you moved to LTE and you were on the old 3G network. So the apps were written to run on slower networks. They may not run on the newer networks very well, especially if you haven't updated them. So mobile app developers are constantly expected to provide a richer experience while increasing speed all the time. So even if you're writing a new app for a new device, what's important is that from a testing point of view, that the app run very, very quickly. And that needs to be reflected in the testing process. Like web applications, many mobile apps incorporate content from a variety of third-party services with the goal of delivering a richer, more satisfying experience. So for instance, I was working at a company where I was podcasting and helping up their social media infrastructure. So we wanted an app that had blogs and podcasts and videos and white papers and all kinds of content that came from, I think it was somewhere around 7 or 8 different RSS feeds from 7 or 8 different systems. Now the user didn't care where they were coming from. They just wanted them all to load quickly and pop up on the screen. Otherwise, why bother? It'd be easier to go to a desktop. And that was a very difficult goal to achieve because as time had gone on and this app was 3 and 4 years old, people wanted it to work faster and faster. Before going live with an app featuring third-party integration, you need to make sure that the integration works seamlessly and smoothly, somewhat related to what I'm talking about, and can deliver the performance you expect. This is important to keep in mind as any of the other aspects we've talked about here, is people want the app to work very, very rapidly. And the more rapid it is, the more likely you're going to have collisions and crashes. All right, so how do we discover an app crash? Let's go to that. Well, some of this may be obvious if you think about it. Certainly, what happens if you disconnect the network? What happens if you change the orientation? You go back to an app that you haven't used in a couple of days, and you double click on the phone, on the iPhone. You go back and see, does it still work? There's each device in the market has some peculiar characteristics. This is back to the issue of automatic testing. Each one is uniquely different. Quality assurance should be aware of each one of these before you start analyzing the app. Let's take for an example of comparing two devices. An Android phone, say it's a Samsung, will have a physical back button built into the device, whereas an iPhone, on the other hand, has a single home button. It works differently. You're going to have to test it differently. So while using an app, when the user has to navigate from the present page to the previous page, he makes use of the back button. In the case of the iPhone, he searches for the back option inside the app. The app should have uniformity across all the devices. And this is just something that you have to consider when you're discovering app crashes. Where is it likely to occur, and how is it going to be different from one device to the next for the same app, for instance? Factors like landscape view and portrait view, when the device is kept horizontally versus landscape mode versus portrait mode, just causes. I've had apps that just literally just disappear right there in front of me when I move from one to the other. It's very disconcerting. Switching between desktop view and mobile view, that is if the app has a desktop view, got to check every aspect of that to discover crashes. Another one that you may not think about too much is toggling between 1x and 2x mode. That means, like in the iPhone, if you can run on an iPad, you can run an iPhone only app on there, but it's kind of small, right? So you can go to double X mode and it pops up and everything looks a little bigger, but at least it fills the screen nicely. Believe it or not, that causes a crash if it's not done correctly. All right, so let's take my final use case. This is one that I think is just particularly interesting. It's the term AMEB is anti-message email and browsing app. So for those of you who have been driving and you have an iPhone or smartphone with you, we all know that texting while driving is not something we want to do, but yet but it occurs. So there's kind of a close-up of the BlackBerry version right there. This is a third-party app that's being developed by Endeavour, and I want to mention that in each one of these use cases, these are apps that are being developed by Endeavour, which I assume you know, but it's important to make a point of that. The AMEB app blocks the device from working when the user is driving above a pre-configured threshold speed limit to prevent the accidents which may happen, when you're distracted. I wished I'd had this app when my kids were teenagers. The user should be able to, but the thing is the user should be able to make or receive emergency calls at any point. So the app has to, could be interrupted to do that if necessary. And users can use the device only after the AVT or the attention verification test is completed. Following are critical scenarios where apps may crash while the user is driving at a high speed and leads to poor. So these kinds of things basically is if they don't work well, then and what I mean by not work well is that the device, for instance, detects GPS and the user enables GPS while he's driving, then and he gets above a threshold point. Does the app? We don't want the app to crash at that point. What happens if you have a call in progress and the user crosses the threshold speed limit? What do you do with the call? Did it cause it to crash or not? What happens if you drive above the speed limit and you allow an enabling of hands-free mobile via Bluetooth to make a call and then it disconnects? Does the app quit working after you've disconnected, or is it still working and not allowing texting? What happens if the device is in idle state and the user is traveling above the threshold speed? How do you need to test that out? clearly, and for this particular app to work, to be tested well, you've actually got to get in a moving car, train, or something, and test every one of these scenarios out. I think it's a fascinating app, actually. So, I think that completes my piece. Let's move on to the next slide. And we did that. And now I'm going to introduce Saurav. Saurav is responsible for testing at Endeavour, and he's going to cover his experience and their years of experience of developing test discovery applications and platforms. Saurav, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tom, for sharing your wonderful thoughts, and I appreciate your time. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to speak with you. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Saurav. I head the testing practice at Endeavour, and primarily I'm responsible for defining test strategy for mobile apps. Before I start, I just want to talk to you why I'm so excited about mobility testing. The best part is you get physical to do testing with a mobile device. You can hold it, you can pinch it, rotate it, swap it, or touch it. And you can do many more things, the best experience for a tester. And I enjoy mobile testing. And unlike in my early career, we used to test only with the desktop, having a keyboard and a few different browsers. Also, you can move around when you are doing testing rather than sitting in your cubicle. So these are the best parts if you are a mobile tester. But that also brings a lot of challenges, like large number of test scenarios, use cases, and these are not defined in your requirement, nor never asked by your customer. And it's difficult for you to prepare a test plan or test case. Now, some of you might be wondering why we choose to have a webinar on crash testing. Well, weeks back, I was just going through a few of the test execution report of different projects at Endeavour, and we noticed that more than 30 to 40% defects are related to crash. And that's significant in number. And the worst part is you can't trace these issues to requirement, as these are primarily usability scenarios, and usability is subjective by nature. And it's very difficult to test, neither to write down in any requirement artifact. And also, you don't estimate your execution, neither review execution, and your effort always piles up, and it adds cost to your project at the end. Now, how do we address these challenges? Now, let me speak to you on the strategy framework that we have evolved over the last many years to discover mobile app crashes. And you can, you need to consider all these factors displayed on this slide when you're putting a test plan to discover crashes. For example, screen tap factors, stress testing, compatibility, orientation, to name a few. And let me talk about a tool that we use to test different real-life network scenarios at Endeavour. And most users use mobile in odd situations, which you cannot think about, but you can just imagine. And it's difficult to recreate those scenarios inside a testing lab. Like, for example, in a lift, you can use your mobile device while driving, you are inside a train, or watching a movie, or even while inside your Airbus or you are airborne. And I know most young kids, I was just reading an article, they play these games, Temple Run, Angry Bird, inside a toilet. And that's a weird but real-life scenarios. And there are hundreds of real-life scenarios that we need to consider to do a connectivity testing. Now, let me click on the hotspot and talk about the tool. Now, we have a tool or application that helps the test engineer to test these different network scenarios to make the mobile application work for the worst case network connection. Now, what we do is to check the behavior of the app, you just execute a test case, and then you go to the manual, go to the setting, and you just set after 2 minutes, just swap between Wi-Fi to GPRS. So you're continuing your testing for 2 minutes or 5 minutes, and you're checking the behavior of the app. And if the app crashes, and while switching from Wi-Fi to GPRS, you can log a defect or an issue to a developer, and a log file gets created, and the developer can go through that file and find out why the app got crashed. Now, this is one of the tool or the technique that we use at Endeavour to cover different kind of network scenarios. Now let's move to the next slide and talk about the key differentiator in terms of testing that we offer to our clients. Now, before I talk about this, let me share an instance with you. Other day I was out for a team lunch, and one of my colleagues asked, "Did you have a WhatsApp?" And I said, "What is that?" And they said, "No, I just want to share a picture with you." Now, WhatsApp, if you know, is one of the highest downloaded app on Play Store. Now, this is a wonderful app, and I know many people use it because of just the user experience. Now, nobody uses SMS or MMS, but they just use WhatsApp. And I was surprised, how people promote your apps. So, well, we live in a fast-moving world today, and a few years back, no one used to pay for web application, but today users pay to use their mobile apps in. And we never used to rate a web application, but nowadays we go out and rate mobile apps, and that means a lot of money is involved in development of these apps. So now how do we address the constant need of great quality app in the market? And we have at Endeavour evolved few frameworks in automation using tools like Robotium, iOS instrumentation. Also, we have a comprehensive framework to address a few of the security testing scenario. That's one of the key concerns in enterprise world today is security. And due to time constraint, let me speak to you about some of the best practices that we use at Endeavour to avoid crashes. Okay. Now here I just thought of putting down a few of these points that as a best practice you can use to avoid crashes. But I would like to highlight one of the key point here is that we never do testing on the emulators. At least one cycle of testing needs to be done in the real device. And if you want to discover more crashes because of the memory, for the CPU usage, and you need to test your app on the real device. And one more thing is I would like to emphasize and I'd like to highlight is that today's world we use a lot of third-party APIs. So you need to use a lot of authorized third-party APIs when you're developing your app. And you need to create a real-life scenario. If I look at my mobile phone, it's always connected to LinkedIn. It's always connected to Flipboard. It's always connected to many news feeds, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, and it's constantly getting feeds from different third-party APIs. So you need to create that scenario when you're testing your application. Now let me quickly take you through one of the healthcare application that we developed for EMDS at Endeavour. And it is one of the healthcare apps which is meant for the doctor to schedule their work and to help them to keep track of their patient record. Now, a few of the scenario, like you are a doctor and you are trying to download multiple report of your patient because most of the time doctors go through different blood or different kind of reports to judge their patient, and your app crashes. And it's very, very frustrating experience for a doctor. And doctor is always busy. And you're trying to also same time you want to take a prescription printout from your iPad. And for example, your app crashed. And it is quite weird. And the doctor may not feel great about using your app. So what I'm trying to tell you is today when we do testing, it's just not about the business use case or the domain that we focus. We need to focus we need to work like the way the doctor is working. Or we need to test the app like the insurance agent need, or if you're a driver. So we need to test the application from the perspective of the user to bring that wow factor when they use our app. Now, personally, I love Android as an operating system and all of its OS version. These are very much mouth-watering desserts, as many of you know, like gingerbread, bread, honeycomb, ice cream sandwich, and let us bring the jelly bean. And recently, Google launched the version 4.2, and the tagline or the release note, it says that it is faster, smoother, and more responsive. Now, constantly, Google and Apple, they're trying to bring the best user experience into the mobility. Now, we need to ask the same question as a tester, when you're designing your app, that wow factor should come up, and when your user uses these apps. Now, let me move to the next slide, and so let me put this way, the mobility adoption or the growth is one of the fastest change that world has ever seen. Every day, 1 million Android device gets activated around the world. And if you look at 1.5 billion download apps every month on Play Store, that's a huge number by any mean. So how do we address this so much of changes, so much of volatility? At Endeavour, we have a state-of-the-art next-generation mobile testing center of excellence. And to tackle the perfect storm of testing world, I say always that these are the perfect three storms, like mobility, agility, and cloud. And we offer different specialized services in testing for mobile apps, and a few of them you can see on the slide. And in my closing note, let me say this, and I know there is no end to user experience. And mobility is driven by 7 billion users on this planet. So we should focus user experience as the key success factor while developing all these apps. And my point is this. We learned many, many valuable lessons over these last 11 years with different projects, different kind of clients. And the key lesson is this, that build testing into the design process from the day one. You can't do testing at a final stage when you're just going for the UAT or user acceptance. And this is what gives the Endeavour the ability to make global enterprises successful with their mobile strategy. And in nutshell, I would say we know mobility and testing end to end. Other day, I was just watching a movie. Some of my listeners would have seen that one of the Hollywood blockbusters is called Transformer. And if you see that there's these nice cars, they get transformed into gigantic robots in few seconds. Now, same way, these tiny mobile devices are transforming our life and the business world, you name it, in the healthcare, retail, in aviation. And I'm so excited about the future. So coming days and months are really going to be exciting, and I'm looking forward to it. And it was a real good pleasure to speaking with all of you. And do write to us with your questions or feedback. Personally, I would love to answer it. Also, let me take this opportunity to thank Tom for sharing his wonderful views in this forum. I appreciate his time and presence. And with that, I'm John, and back to my host, and we'll be opening for the question and answers.
Thank you, Saurabh and Tom, for your valuable insights. Now we'll open our line for the question and answer round. Okay, we see a couple of questions on the question menu here, but due to time constraints, we'll take a few questions here. And let me just take the first one. What is the strategy for coverage of available mobile devices / hardware?
Thanks, Sanjay. It's a good question, and always we get such question. In my opinion, a real good approach to solve the test device problem is to group the device and browser. And you can create three kind of groups. Primarily, group with small devices with less CPU and RAM and low resolution probably, and which has also older software versions and older browsers, probably a year back or 1.5 year back devices. And group 2 can be a priority, the mid-range devices with average CPU and RAM probably less than 512 MB or good screen size and resolution. And the third can be the priority, high priority, the high-end devices with dual and quad-core CPU and RAM probably more than 512 MB and high screen resolution. So this is the way you can address, and we primarily do at Endeavour. We segregate such devices, and then we go for test strategy.
Okay, thanks, Saurabh. And I see a next question popping up, which is how do you approach user experience testing?
Well, that's a great question, and most often asked. And if you're new to the mobile testing, the first thing is that how do I do a user experience testing? Well, the user experience success factor, I would say, is depend on the three things. One is a great design and a positive interaction and the usability factor. Now, based on these three things, you can, probably, categorize your testing. And the most part in the design, you look at for the layout, the navigation, the positions of icon, the different display format, the readability, the language. And from the interaction point of view, you can look at the touch screen, motion sensor, the error message warnings. And from the usability factor, you can look at the progress bar, the performance, the action chain, the screen setup. So these are the few tips or the few things that we do for the user experience testing.
Okay, so I'll just take one last question. So what tools you suggest for the automation of mobile apps?
Well, there are multiple tools available in the current market. For example, for Android, you can look at Robotium, and for iOS, primarily iOS instrumentation. And there are other proprietary tools are also available. But I would say that there are the things that you should look for while selecting a tool is it should support multi-platform, so that you don't add up more work in terms of scripting, and it should support various type of testings, and also it should be like able to test the third-party APIs when you are connecting. Also, the learning curve of these tools should be minimum, and the maintenance of the test scripts should be simple. So these are the few things you should take care when you are going for an automation tool for mobile app.
Thank you, Saurav, for answering the questions in such a detail. Due to time constraints, you're not able to take all the questions, but soon you'll have a document of all the questions with the answers in your mailbox. If you have any queries, please feel free to write us on info@techendeavour.com. And just to reiterate, we have a highlight where Endeavour is offering a complimentary deep dive workshop for 3 to 4 hours, where, as I mentioned in the beginning, our testing team will interact, review, and analyze your mobile solution testing strategy and provide you insights and recommendations. And as I stated in the beginning, this recording will be available on techendeavour.com/webinars within next 2 days. We'll also be sending you email notification with the webinar recording link. And it was a great session, but before closing the session today, I would like to extend my gratitude to Tom and Saurav for taking us through this webinar. And last but not the least, I would like to thank the attendees without whom this webinar would not have been such a success. We appreciate your time and hope to see you at our forthcoming webinars. Have a good day. Thank you.